Okay, so where we left off at the last video, we just made a bar chart for the nominal variable race, and I mentioned that it's very basic. Really, all we did with this command was just tell RStudio our data set's the GSS 100, our variable is race, and we want a bar chart. So how can we enhance this? The next chunk, I say that the line of code adds many graphing options to improve the graph. And something that you should note is when a lot of these commands are pretty long, they roll over onto a second, third, or fourth line. If you're going on to the next line, you want to end the previous line with a plus sign so that RStudio knows this command is continuing and we're still doing a command about a graph. So here, what's different? Well, the beginning part is the same. We are looking at the variable race and we're making a bar chart. But now you see within the bar chart command, we have added color options. Color is the outline of your bar. Fill gives you the internal part of your bar. This command right here is telling RStudio that rather than a count like we had in the previous graph, we are going to be taking the count for each category and divide it by the total, which we are going to make into a percentage, which you remember from our frequency table exercises a long time ago. And so for the y-axis, we're going to have a continuous variable. The labels are going to be percent. We're saying that our title, that's the command here, gg title, and look at how descriptive this is. The bar graph of the distribution of adult Americans by race. And then what do we want to call the labels? And so here we're saying that we want our y label to be percent and our X label to be race. And notice that they are nicely capitalized. They look formal. The title is also nicely formal and capitalized. That's important when you're presenting graphs. Okay, and so here, let's run this and see what we get. Okay, so you'll see that the overall shape is the same as what we had here, but now we have race capitalized nicely. We have percentages on this side rather than just a count. We have a nice title. And we have the bars are now colored with a white fill and a red outline. So if we're writing notes about the graphs that we got, and if you're thinking in terms of, well, what would I need to write for the midterm and talking about my graph, you want to tell your reading audience what you have here. And so I'll say something like, this bar chart presents information from the General Social Survey on race. The tallest bar represents white respondents who make up a little over 80% of our sample. The next largest group is people who identify as Black, followed by the category other, right? So here, writing about the graphs, this is the kind of interpretation I'm talking about. You can also, though, if you want to make sure you remember everything that we did, I'm going to also just have a little thing over here where I'm going to say technical, just to keep things in mind for myself. So for the technical notes, make sure to use GG title to make a title, choose color and fill, make sure the labels are, you know, clear and correct. Okay. Basically, when you are going to be making the graphs yourself, you can use this code, but you have to keep a couple of things in mind. Okay. This is a chunk that's for a nominal variable. So you want to use this chunk for a variable that you have that is nominal. It could be sex, it could be religion, it could be something else. What you're going to replace is anywhere that the variable is. This is the exact variable name from the General Social Survey. You're going to replace that with, for example, sex or religion or whatever the variable is. If you want to, you can play around with the colors. You want to make sure you keep those quotation marks and put the color inside of them. You can leave this whole thing as it is, and you can leave this line about scale Y continuous as it is. Next, though, at the title and the labs, which is short for labels, you are to write a descriptive title of what your graph is about. And notice again, I wrote it in kind of capitals and title case for formal writing. And the labels, Y will always be %, but X is going to be your variable. And so race is a pretty simple variable. But if you had something else like, I don't know, religion was your name in the GSS for the variable, you can write out here religion, religious belief, whatever you want to call it. So again, just to make a note, when you have it up here, it's the exact variable name from the GSS. When you have your title and labels, you can write more freely. Okay. Make sure, notice our notebook is now in red and has the star. It means we need to save it. And I'm going to go right over here and save so we don't lose anything. Okay. What about an ordinal variable? Okay, so same kind of format. It's also a bar chart. This time the variable is class. And we are adding the nice title, and we are adding the variable labels over here. Okay, so again, we have the social class categories as separate bars. The height represents the percentage of people who identify as each social class category. Sorry, I got cut off by the phone ringing. Anyway, so we've got the percentages, we've got our categories, we have a nice title. Then I show an example. This is just more mistakes, right? Warnings, we're not going to worry about that. We're going to go back to our graph. Next, I show you a couple of things to potentially do to your graph. Here is flipping the bar chart to its side. Okay, so you see what it looks like here. This, with this additional command, coord flip, tells RStudio to flip it over on its side. It's the same information, except now it's easier to read these. The circumstance where you would do something like this, flip it by its side, is if you have a lot of labels going across the bottom and they overlap with each other and they're hard to read. So I'm thinking of variables like region, religion, where there's a ton of categories, maybe even marital. You'll probably want to add that plus coord flip to make your graph bar chart flip over on its side. And again, if you were going to say something about this chart, I would mention how the middle class and working class categories are very close in terms of percentages, and then lower class and upper class make up much smaller percentages of the sample from the general social survey. The last kind of graph that we're going to learn how to make is for an interval ratio variable, and it is known as a histogram. So the code is a little different. You want to make sure that the chunk that you choose when you're working with your own variables is the chunk that aligns with your variable type. So for your interval ratio variable, this would be a chunk that you could use. Again, it tells RStudio the data set, the variable, and then now instead of geom bar, we have geom histogram. Things that you can change in here, again, the color and the fill. You can play around with bin width, and you can definitely play with the title and with the labels. Okay, one more thing to note before I run this chunk is that if your title is long and you think it may run over onto, so that you can't see the end of it, if you put a slash lowercase n where you want your title to break into 2 lines, that does make it the output show up on 2 lines. And so I will show you what this looks like. Okay, so the title is on 2 lines. We have the number of children and we have the percent. The bin width, if you notice here, is 1. So our variable is number of children ever born. It goes by number of children from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 8 or more. So this bar is the people who have 0 children, 1 child, 2 children, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. Notice the histogram does not have any space between the bars. And so in this case, the mode is 0 children. We can talk about how this distribution looks. We could talk about the tail that appears. There are very few people that have 8 or more children. Most people have a smaller number. So you would talk about skew. You can talk about other things that you see in this graph as well. So the next thing I ask you to do here is to use the example above to make a histogram for the variable named age. And I want you to have a good title and good axis labels here. I'm going to add a part 3 to this video showing you about the histogram named age. So please move on to the next video in this set.